Today's episode is brought to you by Mazars.
SoundCartel.
From SoundCartel, I'm Nicole Goodman, and this is Business Essentials Daily. At this time of year, as we usually do, we turn to the infinite intellect of economics professor Neville Norman to give us his forecast for the year ahead. And there's both good and bad news. Neville suggests that interest rates may come down, but only if economic growth begins to falter. He says growth is likely to slow and belts will need to be tightened again. And with the federal budget in surplus for the first time in 16 years, he points to overspending states for what could become region-based tax increases. But first, Neville explains to Nick Schilberger what happened, or didn't happen, last calendar year.
Well, Happy New Year, and we hope that 2024's got some more positives than 2023 did. But I think it's important to classify all that you hear about the economy into four main boxes, which I call to get a grip on the economy. G for growth in the economy overall, which for business is purchasing power of the products. R for rates of interest. I for inflation, and P for policy. And we'll cover exchange rates as well. Well, in volume terms, in 2023, the year just finished, we had positive growth again, but it was reduced to just on plus 2%, which was half of the 3.7% growth we had in 2022, which was spurred by a bounce back from the horrid COVID restrictions and helped by resumed migration growth. Now, for business, the fact that the economy is still growing means that purchasing power is still growing, so I'll stick with the conventional thing. After rates of interest, we had more rate uplifts in 2023, but they are only half of the magnitude of 2022, 1.5 total points in 2023, whereas there was 3 points uplift. So I think we can claim that the prediction of most of the uplifts of interest rates took place in 2022, not 2023. By the way, do we have to use this horrid term hikes? I was taught that mean walkabouts, and they're anything but that. On exchange rates, they slumped in 2022, but came back in the year just finished, 2023, a small but welcome effect in cooling inflation. Getting on to inflation, the I of grip, that can mean price growth of almost anything, but the one that hits the headlines is Consumer Price Index, and it's worth focusing it because it seems to be what drives the Reserve Bank decisions more than anything else. That's okay, but the bank never reveals any research on why inflation components are going to be significantly dented by the only thing they can do, which is raise interest rates. Inflation does seem to be resilient, and we've still got stagflation with us, which means an ingrown inflation, which means inflation that is either external or not responsive to the measures the bank takes or any demand pressure. Finally, the one important thing about policy was that the federal budget in 2023 came back into surplus for the first time in 16 years, thanks to a surge of mineral and energy tax windfalls. But from a business point of view, it means that there was no need for any nasty tax recoveries. But let's look to the states. Sorry to be a bit negative, but we are seeing, particularly in Victoria, the booming state deficits being responded by tax measures which are not kind to industry, and you need to watch that right through into 2024.
Well, Neville, that's mostly the past. What's in store for 2024?
Well, I believe there'll still be continued growth at a slower rate. Internationally, India is still growing around the 6%, China around 5% a year. Japan's better than 1%, which has been its average for many years, similar to us now, and I suspect some European economies will hardly be growing like the UK. However, back at home, I think we'll still avoid recession in the total sense, but there'll be a growth slowdown, and a lot of belt tightening is going to be evident. Already it's showing with some easing in holidays and eating out, and that will be further trimmed during 2024. But building and construction should still grow, if by less in 2023, with housing starts and sale prices of houses mostly flatlined.
You know, Mazars have been a long-time supporter of SoundCartel, and now they're helping us bring you this podcast. To find out how Mazars can support your business, visit mazars.com.au. That's mazars.com.au.
Now, you've mentioned a couple of times, Neville, the R word for recession. In early December, it was announced that we've fallen into a per capita recession. Can you explain what that means and how it compares to a full recession and whether it's actually important at all for businesses?
Yeah, well, we've got a reduction in the spending in real terms, that means bricks and mortar sort of thing, and production and disposable income of households per head. And that's a bit of a worry. But for business, if the total continues to grow, then it means for business overall, there's still going to be an uplift in the volume of sales, not for everyone, but overall. So I'm not as worried as some of the headlines.
Now, I've got one final one on recessions, Neville. Not that I like to focus on them, but it's a little-known economic index that can supposedly detect the start of an economic slump. It's called the MUI. The former US Federal Reserve Chairman Alan Greenspan said recently that he followed it, so I'm sure it's one that you'll enjoy explaining to our listeners.
The MUI, yes. I don't know how you dug that one up, but when Alan Greenspan was head of the Federal Reserve in the US, he said the men's underpants index will go. Well, look, I have to tell you quite bluntly, Nick, that as an academic, this is a seat of the pants indicator. I couldn't bond with it all that much. And in fact, thanks for giving the heads up, or is it something else? But at the end of the day, there are things like hamburgers being measured of purchasing power parity that have been used, and maybe it is a bit of a forward indicator. But look, I remember saying at the time, the problem with men's underpants is it doesn't cover enough of the economy, that is.
Very good, Neville. Getting back to more serious things, what else are you prepared to forecast for 2024?
Okay, well, there may be interest rate reductions in 2024 only if the economy slumps further than I expect. So in a sense, it's good news that they'll try to hold them there on the grounds that inflation's probably at the high end or just over the 3% mark of the 2 to 3% target range they keep going on. If they revise that, they'll justify cutting the rates. But if you want some numbers...
I do.
I'm expecting unemployment rates will rise above the 3% into the 4%, but it's a poor indicator of where the economy is going, so I just put it there for the record. My numbers for 24, I'll just cannon gun them. The economic growth rate, 1.4% compared with 2% we had in 23. The unemployment rates in the high fours, interest rates close to where they will start at the start of 24, maybe a reduction and at most one more uplift, but don't be surprised if we don't get that. So that'll mean that the actual rates you pay in business will be 7 to 9%, which is now a real interest rate if the inflation is around about the 3 to 4, which I'm expecting. Exchange rates, I have to say this, pick any number between 63 and 72 cents US. It can be the whim and a fancy of so many things, international events and so on. Inflation around 4% growth, which is pleasingly half of what inflation was in 2022, and that should delight the Reserve Bank. So if you survived to now, 2024 won't make anything much worse unless you're coming off bargain basement interest rates that you've had fixed until now. But for most of the rest, it'll be a better year than we saw in 2023. And let's hope that that message gets to the Reserve Bank instead of spending 2 full days on what they shouldn't need to do, just looking inwards about their own interest rate decisions.
That's University of Melbourne economics professor Neville Norman. This episode of Business Essentials Daily is produced by the team at SoundCartel. Thanks for listening. I'm Nicole Goodman. We'll bring you more Be Daily tomorrow. Follow @BE Daily Podcast across social media and head to bedaily.com.au for more from the Business Essentials Daily podcast. SoundCartel. This episode was brought to you by Mazars. To find out more, visit mazars.com.au. That's mazars.com.au.